civilization is collapsing. That's quite a way to start, isn't it?
It certainly grabs your attention.
Yeah, it's straight from the source material we're looking at today. And it introduces this idea, Turon, as maybe the last chance to save it.
Right, Turon as the proposed solution to, well, global conflict itself.
Exactly. So today, we're diving into excerpts from Turon, Civilization's Last Stand Against Global War. Now, this was written by an expert in OT, which in this context seems to be about Orientalism and Turkology studies, AI, and geopolitics.
Got an assistant to Dr. Mahmoudzhan Kучкарова, right?
That's the one. And our source for this perspective is the OTA Adams Language Academy YouTube channel. So our mission today, really, is to unpack this very bold, almost prophetic take on geopolitics. We want to understand the core claims and figure out what Turon actually means for the future, according to them.
Okay, let's get into it.
Right, so the source talks about a warning from Dr. Mahmoudzhan Kучкарова from about 5 years ago. He basically said, and I'm quoting here, "If a neutral arbiter doesn't emerge between China and the West, a great war will begin."
5 years ago. That would have sounded quite radical to many.
Totally. The source itself says it sounded like futurism back then. But now, it says it feels more like a report from the geopolitical front line.
It's like they're saying, see, we told you so. What was prediction is now description.
Precisely. It's as if current events are just unfolding according to that script.
Well, what's fascinating there, I think, is how it changes the way we might analyze geopolitics. It's not just looking at event A causing event B. It suggests this deeper, almost predetermined framework is operating underneath everything.
A kind of historical inevitability.
Something like that. It challenges the usual view of international relations as this complex, shifting thing based on current interests. This perspective suggests a much larger, older pattern is playing out. Very different from standard foreign policy talk.
Okay, so building on that.
Yeah.
Here's where the source gets, well, really interesting, maybe provocative. It claims that all this talk you hear about multipolarity, multiple centers of power.
Yeah, it's a common theme these days.
Well, the source calls it a deception for the naive. Straight up.
Wow. Okay, so what's the alternative view then?
The argument is blunt. It says the world has actually lived under Western hegemony for centuries. Full stop. And it uses this analogy like any system, a family, a chicken coop, even a state. It only has one alpha, one father, one rooster, one sovereign. No real sharing of power at the top.
So no true multipolarity possible in this view, only one dominant force.
That seems to be the core idea. And then it makes this really surprising historical claim. It says the USSR was actually a Western project.
Sorry, the USSR, a Western project. How so?
Yeah. I mean, the source argues it was built and destroyed by the West. It calls it a puppet balance. It was just created for the illusion of choice.
An illusion of choice.
Right. And Dr. Kучкарова is quoted directly. Even the communist empire was built into the Western paradigm.
Okay, that raises a pretty big question, doesn't it? If we were to even entertain this singular hegemonic view of global power, how does that change how we understand history and current events?
It completely reframes things.
Absolutely. It suggests this single driving force behind major shifts instead of, the usual complex interplay of different independent nations and ideologies. It simplifies things dramatically, or maybe complicates them depending on how you look at it.
So, sticking with this framework, if Western hegemony is the reality and multipolarity is fake, where does China fit in today?
Good question.
According to the source, China is positioned as the only truly independent pole right now, the one exception to this Western dominance.
The sole independent actor, essentially.
Yes, but, and this is crucial, the source insists the West will not surrender its positions easily to China. An inevitable confrontation is implied.
Which leads to
what the source calls the hybrid war chessboard.
Okay, explain that.
It argues that various regional conflicts aren't really what they seem on the surface. They're just moves in this bigger game against China. For example, the war in Ukraine. The source claims it's not really about NATO expansion.
Oh, what's the claim then?
It's presented as being about disrupting Chinese investments that were happening there, starting around 2014.
I see. And the Middle East.
Described as a project aimed squarely at containing the Belt and Road Initiative, China's big infrastructure project.
Right.
And then it points to places like Palestine, Kashmir, the South China Sea, calls them key squares on this global chessboard of hybrid warfare against China.
So if we connect those dots, what emerges is a picture where seemingly separate conflicts are actually just facets of one central struggle.
Exactly. It's reframing them. not as isolated disputes between local actors, but as strategic maneuvers in this direct confrontation between the established Western power and the rising independent China.
That suggests a much more coordinated, centralized strategy behind global events than is usually assumed. It really changes the interpretation of why these conflicts are happening and escalating.
Okay, so if this framework suggests a head-on clash is basically inevitable, what's the alternative? Does the source offer a way out?
Is this where Turon comes back in?
This is exactly where Turon comes back in. It's presented as the crucial answer.
Right.
But the source is very specific. Turon is not supposed to be a third pole, is not another competitor.
Okay, so what is it then?
It's defined as an arbiter, a border, a barrier. Think of it like a buffer zone, maybe.
A buffer zone between West and East.
Between the West and China, specifically. And the reasoning given is, well, it's pretty stark. The source states, China does not assimilate. The West assimilates everyone.
That's a strong generalization.
It is. And based on that, the argument goes, without Turon acting as this buffer, the West actually risks being dissolved into Chinese civilization.
Dissolved. Dramatic language.
Extremely. The conclusion drawn is that Turon is fundamentally a civilizational wall. Without it, an unstoppable merger happens, which is framed as a very negative outcome.
So Turon isn't about creating a new power block, but about preventing a kind of civilizational blending, or perhaps overwhelming, that the source sees as disastrous, particularly for the West.
Precisely. It's a non-assimilative solution, providing a necessary boundary to prevent this total merger.
It elevates Turon beyond just geopolitics, doesn't it? It makes it about the survival of distinct civilizations, according to this source, a very powerful claim.
And interestingly, the source suggests this isn't just theory. It says attempts were actually made to implement this Turon strategy already.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, it gives a few examples of what it calls the buffer Turon strategy. One was the 5+1 format for Central Asia. The 5 Central Asian states plus 1 external power. The idea, apparently, was for it to be a bridge, not an arena, for conflict.
Okay, Central Asia as a buffer. Makes sense geographically.
Then it mentions the situation in Azerbaijan and Karabakh, describing it as some kind of agreed compromise between global centers, fitting this Turon model.
An agreed compromise. Interesting phrasing.
And finally, it brings up something called Odam Tili, which translates to Adam's language. It's presented as a sort of unique intellectual tool for the revival of cognitive independence, presumably within this Turon sphere.
So specific initiatives were supposedly put in motion. What happened to them?
Well, here's the tragic part, according to the source. All these attempts were sabotaged from within.
Sabotaged? By whom?
Source points fingers quite directly. It names pseudo-elites in Uzbekistan, certain Dashnak forest groups, which seem to be specific factions opposing the strategy, and generally bearers of false identity.
And why would they sabotage it?
The claim is they betrayed the Turon project for short-term comfort, sacrificed the long-term vision for immediate, probably personal or factional gains.
That really underscores the difficulty, doesn't it? Implementing such a massive geopolitical shift. Even if you believe it's vital, like the source clearly does, the internal politics and resistance can be overwhelming. It suggests the biggest threat wasn't necessarily external opposition, but internal betrayal or short-sightedness.
Yeah, it adds this whole layer of internal fragility to the plan.
Yeah.
So after all this analysis, the failed attempts, the sabotage, what's the bottom line? Where does this leave us, according to the source?
It sounds like it's leading to a stark choice.
Extremely stark. The conclusion presented offers humanity only two exclusive paths forward. Path 1, global war, a direct head-on conflict between China and the West, the catastrophe Kучкарова warned about.
Okay, and path 2?
Path 2 is civilizational reclosure. And crucially, this can only be achieved through Turon as the arbiter of a new era.
So it's either global war or Turon. No third option. No possibility of, say, a managed coexistence or a different kind of global order.
Not according to the source. It presents a completely binary choice. A zero-sum game, really.
The gravity of that choice, it's immense. It forces you, the listener, to really grapple with the implications of such an outlook. It essentially dismisses any other potential outcome or solution as impossible, which is quite a definitive stance on the future of global power.
Definitely. So this whole deep dive really centers on Turon being presented as this absolutely critical, maybe the only defense against a worldwide catastrophe.
The last stand, as the title says.
Exactly. And the source wraps up with this really interesting historical reflection. It says, history has come full circle.
Oh, so?
It claims that the Turkic peoples, the Turks, were actually there at the origins of civilization and statehood, way back in antiquity.
Right, a reference to ancient history.
Yes. And the argument now, millennia later, is that the historical responsibility falls back onto their shoulders.
Responsibility for what?
To preserve civilization. But notice the wording. It explicitly says their role now is not to build, but to save. Not to start anew, but to hold back from demise.
So not creation, but preservation. Yeah. Holding the line.
Precisely. A defensive, stabilizing role dictated by history, according to this perspective. Which leaves us with a final thought to consider, drawn from the source's framing. What does it truly mean to think about civilization not as something building or evolving, but as something that urgently needs to be saved from collapsing?
And what does that imply about the specific role certain cultures or groups might have to play in global affairs if you accept that premise?
Yeah, it's a heavy concept, something to really mull over. We definitely encourage you to subscribe, share this discussion if you found it interesting, and most importantly, keep thinking critically, keep exploring these complex ideas.